Hey, Sam, you come up with that intro line?
You didn't tell me that was today.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Writers Room with Sam and Jim. This is the show where we bring writers into our writers' room to help them work on and develop their story, and we're going to do that with Kat Boyd in just a bit.
But first, Jim wants to go off about something.
So the thing that's been on my mind the past few days, I just finished rewatching Normal People on Hulu, which is this beautiful little, it's a half-hour drama, which is kind of interesting in itself. But it's a beautiful little story about two young people in Ireland. It follows them across just a few years of their relationship, how they affect each other, how they change each other's lives, this little love story.
And you're not watching because there's naked people in it.
Well, there's a lot of naked people in it.
But that's not why you're watching it.
That's not why I'm watching it.
Right.
I'm sure it's why a lot of people are watching it, but it's not why I'm watching it.
Okay.
But just as a writer, it accomplishes a bunch of things that I think are really, really interesting. And it all kind of falls under the umbrella of don't forget that every scene is really about your characters. The story is this small. It's tiny.
Maybe you mean the plot.
Yeah, the plot. It's not big, but every scene, every episode is just about these people discovering some little thing about themselves or about each other or just discovering that they're not doing a good job of discovering what they need or want or whatever that is. It's brilliant.
And it's so simple the way they shoot it, too. I mean, there's nothing fancy about it.
No, it's all in close, and they don't. I actually went out and found a couple articles about the making of the show because I was so interested from a production standpoint, right? Like, they don't give you those cinematic vistas of Ireland that you so often get. They wanted to keep it in the people's lives. They made a point of, for instance, both the male and female lead, they're about equally nude. It's not the male gaze thing, right, where it's all about the woman being naked. No, it's both of them in this case. And that felt really real. They had an intimacy coordinator. They shot 10 days of sex scenes, right? But it was all fully choreographed, and you can't see, of course, what's off camera. And they both felt very comfortable with each other and all that kind of stuff. And it comes out on screen. But the thing I found most interesting in that with them was that even in the many, many lovemaking scenes in the show, it wasn't that normal thing of it's a sex scene, right? Here's we're gonna do cuts of people rolling around, and where it's sort of an addendum to the plot. The idea that these two people just went off and had sex. They rejected that idea of a sex scene, and instead it's a scene between the two people, and they're communicating very intensely with each other while they're having sex. So you're actually gaining insight into the characters. It's not a throwaway scene where you're just doing your gratuitous, premium cable, we're going to see some TNA kind of thing.
That's cool. And you're right, that sex scenes, they're just, it's like, oh, look, we got to the sex scene, and now we're signaling the relationship is escalated to this,
right.
And then we move on. Can I tell you who was really uncomfortable during those sex scenes? Was the writer sitting at the monitor.
So true.
Because I've been that writer at the monitors. I was actually there when on a show when Gillian Anderson was having a sex scene, and she wasn't wearing a lot. And I'm a huge Gillian Anderson fan. She's X-Files and Sex Education. She and so many great things. She's a great actor. And there I thought I need to leave right now, and I couldn't get out because it was in a bedroom and everybody was stuck in the room.
Closed set.
And so
Scary words.
It was mortifying. And the minute I could escape out of that room and go as far away as possible. So the idea of being that close to people in that intimate moment, plus the characters so well, and things are actually happening in that moment. Oh my God.
Yeah, so what you're saying, Sam, is you really forget everything I'm talking about. You don't want to put dialogue in there because if there's no dialogue, the writer doesn't have to be on set.
It's all about me and my insecurities.
All right, that's what I wanted to go off on this week. Let's get on with the show.
Kat, hello. Welcome to the show.
Hey.
Hi, Kat.
Sam. Hey, Jim. Hi.
Hi.
How are you guys?
Thank you for taking time to talk to us. So, Kat, I keep asking this question, but are you from LA?
No, but I've lived there the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my life.
Did you move there to be a writer? here to be a writer?
I moved there to work in soap operas in daytime, and I got headhunted by Disney, who owns ABC, and they recruited me to be a website producer, but my goal was to get into the daytime writers program, which I did just before the writer's strike, so that was super helpful.
Jim and I, if it makes you feel better, Jim and I turned in our pilot
to ABC.
To ABC days before the strike.
And then we were picketing outside, looking up at the offices where it was sitting on someone's desk waiting to go into the incinerator.
Not only that, someone's desk, his name was Steve McPherson, who was the president of ABC at the time. It was on his desk. We were, as Jim said, picketing in front as he drove past.
Nearly running down one of our friends one day.
And flipping off the writers. Yeah, we're like, no, this is...
That sounds like him because he was kind of a jerk. So.
Well, it was stressful. And then, of course, shockingly, they passed. And
shockingly,
yeah,
right?
I think they passed on everything that was in development that year.
Yeah.
Oh, they had to.
They all got thrown out.
They kind of had to.
But that show ended up getting picked up by Sci-Fi Channel and went to series, and we did 78 episodes of Haven.
I didn't know that's how. I didn't know that was an ABC show first.
Yeah, it was.
Or that you were pitching it to them first.
Yeah. No, we wrote the pilot for them. So
that's amazing.
So you work for Disney. So it sounds like you have real jobs. Why?
I've had real jobs. Yeah.
Why would you want to be a writer if you have real jobs?
Doesn't that answer itself? You've had a real job, now you want to be a writer instead?
I think writing is a real job. I do.
Well, it's a job. It's definitely a job. I don't know how real, but yeah, okay. I mean, just insurance and regular check and all that stuff. But yeah, I totally get it. I know. You are what you are.
All that. I don't think writing is something like it's not a, oh God, this is what I'm going to pursue. It's like, I don't have any choice. This is what I was born to do. This is what I knew I wanted to do when I first learned to read. And I learned how to write by plagiarizing like other little stories, because that's what I thought writing was. It was like, oh, you just write the same book with different characters.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a very successful path to being a writer.
Well, Kat, clearly that tells us you are one of us.
You are doomed.
One of us, and you are doomed. It's true.
I'm totally doomed. Completely doomed.
I think my biggest piece of advice for anybody that wants to be a writer, is to marry a doctor.
Oh yeah.
Or someone with a steady job with insurance and all that good stuff.
And get a Nordic track or something.
Gotta work. So when I was in my 20s in LA and I was real cute, I would frequent this coffee shop in Beverly Hills, and there was this like cadre of old Italian men. And I mean, these dudes were like dripping money. Like their socks looked like they were $700. And this one man was like, I see you in here writing all the time. I feel like you just need somebody to help you out. And, I have a house in Tuscany. And if you want to just live in my house and you can just write all day long. And I was so indignant and stupid that I was like, I would never. And oh my God, that's just disgusting. And who are you? And get away from me. And now that I'm not 20 and young and cute, I'm like, what a dumbass. Like,
his name was Martin Scorsese.
What's wrong with me?
Right.
So he would be dead by now, you guys, and I would have like this villa in Tuscany to write in. So
right.
Who's stupid? Yeah, I blew it. I blew it big time.
No, the kids he had with his wife would have the villa, and you'd be back writing in the coffee shop in Beverly Hills.
But she'd have stories.
I would have worked it out with her. I'd have worked it out with the wife. Like I wasn't trying to steal her husband. I just wanted the socks and the villa.
Right.
Yeah. Well, all right. So let's segue over to what we're writing, what you're writing about now. So give us a log line, or it doesn't have to be perfect or neat or anything like that. Just what's the show about?
So I had this. I love cop shows. Strangely enough, even though I hate Law and Order, but I love cop shows and I love The Shield. And I had this notion of writing a cop who broke all the rules but got the job done but wasn't corrupt himself, was actually like a decent man, but just a mess, because I like messy people. And so I wanted to write this. I got this idea because I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood of writing about the McJew, a half Irish, half cop who goes back to his hometown in Detroit to clean up some of the corruption, because it's a very politically corrupt city, and assembles a team to investigate corruption that is actually happening. It's happening by this deputy mayor, who's his cousin, who brought him to town to do all of this, but he doesn't know that his deputy mayor, who's his cousin, is actually the center of all this corruption.
Right.
I wanted to do like sort of a task force show that also explored the inner life of this wild PTSD, half Jewish, half Irish detective. So there you go.
Wow. All right. First of all, can we just take a moment to appreciate McJew?
Yes.
Because Jim's
that's a sandwich I haven't found at McDonald's yet.
Jim's Irish, half Irish, and I'm all Jew. So
there you go.
I think that's the new name. The new name.
Yeah.
The new name of this show. But
we'll send you our script if when hiring time comes around.
But the and of course, when you say task force show, I immediately go to one of the best shows in the history of television, which was The Wire.
Yeah.
The Wire, yeah.
Right, and you've of course seen that.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, and that of course was the whole organizing principle of, well, season 1 and it kept going.
Right.
Right. In ways
it was all interconnected in different angles.
Right, and that was a great structure.
Well, and like Baltimore, Detroit, like that's a black-run city, right? So you have the Jewish Irish cop and a black government structure and all that stuff to play with.
Right, and God, the race stuff would be so good. I know, I love that. And you know, the funny thing with the race stuff in The Wire, it exists, but it's not really about racism. It's not about it's just racial politics.
Right. At the street level, everyone's dealing with the same shit.
Right. Is that what you're thinking about, Kat?
That's what I'm thinking about. And I did want to, because so much of the interesting part about Detroit for me was that it has been largely a black-run city in terms of like the government. And I grew up with parents who worked my mother worked, for the city of Detroit. And so I was, with the city council president as a kid, and she was friends with the mayor. And so I got to see kind of the inner workings of all of that. And it was just a bunch of black people doing white level corruption. That was just...
Yeah, that sounds like Detroit.
Where is white level on the where's that above purple, below yellow?
It's the most profitable level.
It's definitely the most profitable level.
I found it fascinating, but I think I wanted to do it from, at first I was like, well, maybe I should just do a black cop. But problem was that, the actual police force was always super white, and it was, run by black mayors. And it was just that kind of juxtaposition was really interesting to me. And so that's kind of where I got the angle from, that it would be a white cop and not just a black guy. But he will have his task force, obviously, I want to be pretty racially mixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm in. It's
a great milieu, right? And Detroit is notoriously corrupt. And certainly now, some large chunk of the city is abandoned, and they've been clearing out houses to return to just like empty lots instead of abandoned houses and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. And there were two shows that I can think of in recent times that were set in Detroit. Maybe you'll remember them. One was Nicky Toscano was on
Detroit 187.
Detroit 187 with
Michael
Imperioli.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it was like a season?
Yeah, I think a season. And that was just a cop show. That wasn't anything like you're talking about.
Standard network lifespan.
Well, yeah. And then there was the really dark one with the British actor, Winter something, or Cold Sky, Blue Sky.
Oh, Low Winter Sun?
Low Winter Sun.
Oh, I never saw that.
Oh, yeah, I never watched that. I heard of it.
It was really good. I only watched a few, but it was really grim. It was hard to watch.
Wasn't that an adaptation of like a Danish show? Wasn't that part of that?
It was an
that
adaptation.
was a Danish one, I think, or some Scandinavian.
Right.
All the dark stuff is always Scandinavian.
So my biggest question about this show, and it's only the biggest until the next one, but what is the tone of this show? Because I ask you this, because this could go in any number of directions. Like Low Winter Sun was just grim, whereas I would say the Michael Imperioli show would be maybe gritty. The Wire had a lot of humor in it,
a lot of heart
in that one, which it wasn't as accessible in the other shows for me. Where do you see? How do you feel about it?
My tone is more The Wire, more The Shield, a little dark. I like it dark. I like it gritty, but I like it funny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just some moments of humor, because you can't just be, when everyone hanging themselves watching the show. Right. But I do like the darker side of things a little. And I feel like, if you're tackling corruption, I don't want it to be satirical or any kind of way. Like I want it to be sort of true to what goes on in the government. But there's a lot of opportunity for humor, and also because of just this character Zach and his life is just sort of ridiculous. There's a half Irish, half Jewish man. Like there's no way you can be Irish without humor, Jim, right? So
that's right.
Unfortunately, the Jews are not a very humorous people.
Right.
So that'll be that real push-pull. So, all right, that's great. And this is, of course, everybody's favorite part of writing, where you're like, oh, it'll be a little of this and it'll be a little of that. It'll be wonderful. And then, and it will. It's perfect in our minds right now. So in The Wire, and of course, we're going to get to the most important question, because just the most recent one that I said. But the McNulty, right, in the main cop, in the white cop, in The Wire, is driven by the fact, as we learn over 5 seasons, he's driven by anger. Mm-hmm. And he cannot control himself. And he's arrogant and he's angry. Although he smiles.
But he's also good at what he does.
He's good at what he does. He's driven. It's just that to get what he wants, he will steamroll over everybody. Anybody, yeah. And the only reason people even tolerate him after that is because they know that he didn't do it to line his pockets. They didn't do it for anything other than self-righteousness, but he was right.
Yeah, he wants to be a cop the right way he thinks it should be.
Right. Yeah. But his flaw is that it's actually a selfish act at the same time as it's a magnanimous act, because it's all about him and he doesn't care. So we have this perfect character in one of my favorite shows ever in the history of television. How is this guy? No
pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure.
But no, what does this guy want?
And how does his PTSD play into who he is? Well, why does he need to have that for the show? What does that do for him?
So he's on a redemption arc. He was in the Army and killed some people, killed a kid, and he's had to come home. His cousins brought him home, and this is where I'm kind of wrestling with his wants and his needs, because he's coming home to do this thing for his cousin, but he's also taking care of his father, who is who's very sick, and so he's come home for that. So he has a purpose to be there. He has a kind of twofold purpose to be there. But he and his father have never had this great relationship. So in his mind, he's thinking of, his father's dying, like this is his last opportunity to have a relationship with his father before his father dies, and reconnect with him. And also, because his father was a cop for Detroit, he was kind of driven to do this in honor of his father. So I haven't really figured out what is deeper in his wants other than those surface level things.
Well, I'm glad you identified them. And they're not, in my opinion, they're not totally surface level. They're external.
They're real.
They're real, but they're a little external, right? So my question would be then, what's his flaw? How is he his own worst enemy? The PTSD is fine, but there's got to be, going back to McNulty, he was given this task force, which is the worst thing that could have happened to him, because it kind of unleashed him. and right. So what's the worst thing that can happen? Why is it bad?
Well, the first of all, he doesn't want a task force. He does not. He's a solo operator, and he always, he was a special forces, so he operated very solely. as a sniper. So he does not work well in groups, and he's forced to be in this group, which is pretty much his worst nightmare, to have to actually interact with people and to have to be responsible for more lives. Like, he just does not want to be responsible for anyone else's life.
Right.
So having a task force of cops who he has to mentor and like basically lead is pretty much the worst thing he can imagine.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
Why is it the worst thing? Because he's this is the bad, too simple version, but to just illustrate what I'm talking about, does he hate being in charge, or does he hate people looking at him? And now he's got 10 cops looking at him all the time. Does he suffer from anxiety? Does he what is he hiding, and how are we going to see him struggle with that thing, week after week?
So he's got the PTSD has caused him to have hallucinations, and which kind of debilitate him, and it's a weakness now that he hasn't quite dealt with. He's not in any therapy. He's not taking any drugs. Like, he's just trying to deal with it himself. But because of that, like, he'll randomly see the kid. He'll randomly flash back to being in combat, and he's kind of debilitated in those moments. So his fear is, if he's got charge of people and he has to lead them, like, he never knows when he's going to have one of these episodes. He never knows if he's going to accidentally let someone else get killed because he's debilitated. So he's fearful for other people because of this broken thing inside of him.
I was thinking when you were talking about him being an operator, the thing about a lot of those guys is that they're actually part of these very tight-knit teams that depend upon each other utterly, right? And they can trust the other guy 1,000%. And as you were pitching this, I was thinking, that's his problem, is he doesn't really trust the other people in his task force to hold up their end, right? They're going to leave him exposed because they're not as well trained or as dedicated or whatever as he is. But now that you get to the end of saying that, I wonder if his problem is that he doesn't think he's the one who's going to betray the others and let them down.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think, though, that he's extremely skilled, and I think of him as being an elite warrior. So I do think that he doesn't expect anyone, or would never think of anyone who would be as good as him. Did you guys ever see Black Hawk Down?
Sure.
Yeah.
There was a character in there who Eric Bana played, and he was this special ops, but he was part of this elite force, but he operated really well by himself. Like, he would do things for the other guys and be with the other guys, but his preference was to always be by himself because he worked better that way. And he was a character who I thought of when I was creating Zach, because I thought, well, you can't completely operate as a solo person in any military. Like, part of it, that whole ethos is the band of brothers.
Right.
So, but what is that person? It's the sniper, it's the special forces dude who does have a little bit more autonomy and can be a little bit separate from the group, and that's kind of where I'm trying to drive him, where he understands how to function in that group mentality, but it's not his preference and it's not his comfort zone.
So, all right, that's good. I'm trying to think. I want to apply that to actual story, and then see how it trot it out and see how it works. So let me ask you a question. What's the central case about? Do you know that yet? And if you don't, that's totally cool. But what is what's the first
particular
season?
kind of corruption, or
are we doing one case per season kind of deal, or what's the task force doing?
So what it is there is it's definitely it's this one central case for the season. I'm thinking, because there's a resurgence of an old drug network that used to exist in Detroit called Young Boys Incorporated, and they were basically, that's the name of them. And it was crazy.
That is crazy.
They were a network of drug dealers that was so intense and really, really finely put together for a network of drug dealers. And they were all young. They were all like in their teens and in their 20s. And it took years for the police to finally break apart this network. And so in my show, this network has researched, just as Detroit is trying to rebound and recover, here comes, Young Boys Incorporated Part 2. Right. And the police force is not able to do anything to stop these guys, and so they're putting together this elite task force, and the deputy mayor calls in his cousin, who he knows is special forces, to try to help break apart this network of new young drug dealers. So that's kind of the central case, and I did want to bring back some of that historical knowledge of what Young Boys Incorporated was without using that name in terms of this show, because I don't know that could exist anymore that same way. But certainly, that's the basis of this group.
But if it's corruption, is track back to the cousin who brought him in or something, and it gets
right. That's where I was going, because it needs to. We want to differentiate it from The Wire, right? We need to get away from that.
Yeah, and that's he is the center of it all. What Zach doesn't know is that he's trying to divert himself away. And that's where I'm trying to figure out how I do that, because I know that I want it to be that he's got this cousin who he doesn't know is sort of the center of corruption. But how do I do that and make it make sense that he's brought his cousin in to break apart the network, but he's at the same time trying to make sure his own corruption and his own network of money flow and power isn't interrupted.
Well, all right, this is great, because this is kind of modular. There's pieces here,
right,
and all we need to do is, it's so simple. We'll just do this, but we need to push.
It writes itself. Sam.
It writes itself. I'm just going to put 50 blank pages right here, Jim. I'm going to go to the can. They need to be full when I.
Jared, type that up.
So get it done.
Get it done. So, first of all, the idea that a guy would bring in a broken cop to work on something. Okay, well that's
classic,
classic, and in a good way. I mean, I'm going to make a weird reference, but Ted Lasso, the comedy,
right?
She brings in a failed coach,
Jason Sudeikis,
who can't coach soccer because she wants to destroy the team. There's that version, right? I'm going to bring this guy in. I'm going to act like, I love you, and I want to give you a second chance, but the whole time, it's because I want you to fail. Another version is he brings him in because he knows he's good, and he wants him to destroy the competition or the drug dealing system that is messing with whatever corruption he's involved with. And so this is like a clean way to do it. And by the way, he's getting regular reports on what's going on, and he's kind of controlling things, and he realizes by the end of the season or at some point that he's being manipulated by his cousin,
which is really key. I think you have to play the cousin cards up. Right?
Yeah.
You can't try to hide that, or it's not going to last very long. We're going to see that coming.
Yeah, at some point. I think Jim thinks the audience is a little smarter than sometimes they are, and I know everybody says, "Oh, the audience is so smart; they figure everything out." Jim and I wrote a show where, and we argued about this for a long time, and we didn't have an answer, but where a woman goes to a town where. How many years? 27 years before this, someone who looks just like her was there, and she
thinks
says,
it must be my mom.
It must be my mother. And then we did 13 episodes on a supernatural show on the Sci-Fi Network, and we were watching the web constantly, and there was one person that posted, "Hey, I wonder if that's her that was there 27 years ago," and then that person
shot down in flames on the boards.
Everyone was yelling, "That's insane! They couldn't possibly do that." And then we revealed it's her, and I'm like, "How did we
get away with that?
How did you not see it?"
Right,
yeah.
and the way you would get away with it is, you would make that other guy, you would make him flawed, but also very real and connected, and you would get no reason why he would do that if the motivation is obvious. But I'm only saying that to argue with Jim, because that's what we do. But I want to say the corruption on the other side is really interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the thing the Wire got right. It's just as interesting being in the heads of who's doing what and why they're doing it and what their motivations are. Because their motivations are not always, they're just trying to line their pockets. A lot of times it's how the system works and is flawed in its own particular ways. And that generates a lot of story.
Is any of this landing for you, Kat?
Yeah, no, especially the notion of bringing him in to take out the competition, because I had thought of that angle. Like, there's no such thing as one drug dealer network. There's always multiple, and there's always a top dog. And what he's trying to fight against is this top dog network, who are called the Young Presidents in my show.
Right.
They all have the top the top dog at the chain is Nixon, and
of course he is.
Of course he is, and he's the guy who Zach is trying to get to.
Right.
To take him down, so that he has a protagonist to work against. But he doesn't really know that his cousin is what he's really fighting. But he thinks it's Nixon who he needs to take down, and that'll solve all this. He'll break that network, and that'll make the other ones just splinter apart.
Now, if one of the things that what's the main guy's name? What's his name?
Zach. Zach. Yeah.
Yeah. So if his thing that he wants most of all is some sort of relationship with his father, that's where you started. He comes back for his father or whatever it is with his father. Then, of course, we exist to cause pain to our character. So the person who loves his father most besides Zach is the cousin, right? Or you make the price of taking down the cousin potentially taking down the father, taking down the relationship with the father, right? That would be like one way to look at that, because
I like that.
Well, it's just going back to the basic rule of how do I make things worse for for the characters, right? And that would hurt. And I don't know how many episodes you're thinking for a season, or I'm thinking you're talking about one task force per season, and it would continue kind of like The Wire, but which, by the way, when I say that's the highest praise there is, if it's kind of like The Wire, but that would, in my mind. But does that work for you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, because what I was thinking, I was thinking like a 10, 11 or so episode season, because nothing's long anymore.
Right.
But definitely that this task force would end up being his de facto family. Like he would eventually gel with this group, and those would become his people, and so that they would carry over with him to the next problem. Because I feel like you solve one problem and 20 more come, right? So
yeah, right. So I assume so let's talk about some of these other characters that he's seeing now. He's white. We got black people. The power structure is predominantly black, I would imagine, right? And are the drug dealers, are they black, or they're
black?
Okay, so how do you want to get into that, or are you saying that it's incidental to the show? Like, it's part of it, of course.
I do want to. I want to get into it, but I'm very leery of it just being like a Wire knockoff.
Right.
Right.
So I don't want it to be that, and that's kind of why I was thinking of, I loved the notion of bringing back the Young Boys Incorporated, because they're young kids, and that was a little bit of a difference to me, and I thought was really interesting, and plus it's freaking fascinating. You guys got to look this up. Like it was just an incredible network.
I got to watch the show. I don't need to look it up.
Yeah,
watch the show.
You're going to tell me all about it.
But I have to
tell you all about it.
One thing that they didn't get into in The Wire was the love story. I'm just going to go out there and be kind of,
I was wondering that too. Because it feels like this guy's emotionally damaged. You have me wondering if he's in therapy. Mm-hmm. If he's not in therapy, is he in bars? What's the price of what's the price of the PTSD, and how do we see that? And at a more personal level, we talked about a relationship with the dad, but what else are we seeing from him? How is that coming out? How are we living with his
in his private life? Right? Yeah, because that's really important.
And I love a love story. Like, I love anything that has a bit of a love story to it. So I didn't want him to not have potential for that. And so I did think of, he's not an alcoholic by any means, but he certainly does need to numb himself from time to time because he's not doing therapy and he's not doing anything he should be doing to take care of himself. So there is a bar that he goes to that's owned by a kind of salty lady who's not at all like she's a perfect type of lady for him because she's not, this ultra feminine thing. Like she's tough and she's strong and she owns this bar, and in my head they could develop a thing because I think she would have her own demons,
right.
and there's nothing sexier or sadder than two broken people.
So let me pitch something to you that makes it a little different, because that's all good, by the way, and I get that, but we got to funk that up a little bit, right? So okay. How old is he?
He is 38.
Great. Why don't we make her 58 or 65?
Okay.
I'm just pitching. You by the way, when this is all over, you
or 19.
No.
No, I'm just that was my network note. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Can she be
that
hotter?
Is a network note.
Yeah. And skinnier and blonder. No, I'm just saying, or she's black and 58, and because she's white and
that might be a nice way to play with the race dynamic.
Yeah, I mean,
in the context of everything else.
I want to make it less. I want to make it more interesting. And a woman saving a cop from his damage or dealing with his damage. Okay, I mean, I get that. That happens every single day, and not just on I mean, in real life, right?
Yeah.
So, but can we funk it up by making her different in some way, right? Can make her, and also if he, if there's a calmness to her, right? If there's a completely chillness to her, you know what I mean? Tell me why you hate that idea or like that idea.
I like the idea of her being different, and I had thought maybe she would be Latina. But
sure.
I want him to have like maybe a chance at a real life, and I feel like someone who's like too much older than him is just so settled and wouldn't want anyone in her life. Like she would just be like, I've got my bar, I've got my thing, I don't need this fellow.
Mm-hmm.
That might
great?
Be what makes it work between them.
Exactly.
If he's kind of a loner dude, right?
Yeah, you don't want it to be like it's obvious that these two to get together. And again, it's not about the idea so much. You're just talking about what we look for in it, which is if I'm not expecting them to hook up in that way, and forget about just the sex part. I'm just talking about if they're not obvious for each other, but then they become together. I want to come back. That's where
I like that.
You know what I mean? I'm not trying to talk you into it. I'm just saying the idea.
No, it's interesting now.
Because now you're saying, okay, well, why would she be interested in this damaged 38-year-old white dude who comes in and doesn't talk to anybody? And that question is great. I'd like to answer that question.
Right. And for me, I mean, I think these questions, like you're pitching, Sam, that's the thing for this whole show, because The Wire worked because it was so supremely well done for what it was, and the core conceit here is not revolutionary, right? Like, this is a show we've seen versions of before. So what's going to make it great is the particulars of the characters and the relationships that are new and fascinating in their own ways.
Because the story engine totally works.
Right.
I mean, this is what Jim's saying. It's the story engine of task force, one crime, corruption. I get it. And I'm in, by the way. I like these kinds of shows.
Right.
But now, how is it Kat's show? And I realize we're now pitching Sam and Jim's version of the show, and I want to be respectful of the fact that it's your show. But that's the questions that Jim and I are working on a script right now, and we were just talking about it yesterday, and it's just something we've been writing on when we're not writing everything else. And I said, let's have it be a birthday party. It's a birthday party for the daughter, and everyone's going to get together and blah, blah, blah. And then and he's like, yeah, something like that. And I know he's just talking about that structure. I mean, that's what we're talking about. But I spent an hour last night while I was cooking dinner trying to figure out how the hell am I going to make a birthday party interesting, right?
Right.
And because they're just fundamentally, I've seen them. And I know it's obviously we've all seen birthday parties, but how do I make it different? And
did the cake explode?
well, in our case, the world explodes. But and that does make it more interesting. But that's always the question: is how do I put my spin on it without going too far, which is a big right. Every single aspect, I think of the process, we can never let ourselves have the vanilla thing if there's a way around it. But the engine itself, that I think is better when it's vanilla, right? When it's just straight ahead, it's easier to write. And as an audience member, it's easier to follow. You know, I don't know if you're watching Queen's Gambit right now, but one of the most interesting things is I have no real idea. She's about a master, or young woman who becomes a chess master, and I don't know what her goal is. I don't know what okay, first I got to compete in this. It's 6 episodes or 8 episodes, and every time she's going to go into structure, and that's the story engine. I know she's going to go from state to national. Nope, they took that all out, right? And it's interesting because they did it. But there's part of me as a TV viewer that's is a little bit lost, and I'm noticing it while I watch it, and I wonder if Scott Frank, who's an incredible writer, if he did that on purpose. So it wouldn't be like a regular sports show, a movie where you're like, okay, it's going to be about the big game at the end. There is some of that in there. She is going to go have the big game with the Russians, and I haven't gotten there yet, but it's not. It's not the thrust.
It's not the expected. It's not what the show's about.
Right. But in your case, you do have that thrust. You built it right in. It's so great.
Yeah.
Right. So now you have the room to really move around on your characters and what the episodes look like and all of that, because the story's always going to be going forward. They're going to get closer. They're going to get further. They're going to have setbacks. It's built in. So can we talk about the city? What's the city corruption going on?
From the angle of like, how is the city suffering? Is it, or what do you mean?
No, I mean, like, what's the story of the corrupt? See, when you say urban corruption, I'm like, lady, you got to narrow that down because everybody's got their hand out. Everybody talks about government being corrupt. I'm like, look, you put 3 people together and they do anything, it's going to be corrupt. So, what is the exact corruption that you are talking about? Is there one thing in season 1 where they are trying to, bad version, build the housing development? Are they trying to bring in the federal grant? What's being stolen? What's the corruption?
So that's still something I'm still also figuring out, because I want to bring in elements that I know and understand. And one of the things that was pretty crazy for me learning about growing up was how completely corrupt the urban housing development was. And how they basically it was so much graft and so much backhanded deals, and all of it was to keep the banks were in cahoots to keep like certain people out of the neighborhoods and to keep the city balanced with who they wanted in these neighborhoods, destroying entire neighborhoods just so that they could keep control of the area. And so part of me wants to have that be sort of what the underlying corruption is and why the drug network, because that was part of what kind of got uncovered was the Young Boys Incorporated was helping drive the white flight.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so there was this thought that maybe they were funded by the actual Detroit government,
right,
so that it contributed to the brown people basically leaving the city or getting driven out of the city so that they could have better control. So there's something in there that I think I want to play with. I just haven't quite figured it out.
Let me jump in, because Jim and I are nodding at each other. That is spectacular.
That's exactly the kind of thing I was thinking of, is how are they being used by the politicians instead of just feeding them cash or whatever.
And as usual, I'm going right to who's involved and what are the scenes. That's where my brain goes. And the idea that you're going to see people living in these houses, these projects, these developments, and they're pawns, right, in the middle, and that humanizes this, so it's not an intellectual thing, right? That's always to me the question. When you have payoffs and that, I'm like, what does it matter? Corruption? You want to see corruption? Just look at the New York Stock Exchange. Corruption it's hard to understand, right? But when you see people suffer at the hands of it, in The Wire later on, the mayor basically, because of his own corruption of his soul, he deprived the police and the schools of money because he needed to. And so, but that's interesting. But then we saw the cops suffering, and we'd already seen an entire season of the schools suffering. So who's going to suffer as a result of that? and those are the characters.
And how do we see it?
And how do we see it? And now you're saying, oh
Right.
my God, we can get into the projects and see who lives there. And as opposed to what we normally see on television, which is cops coming in, bashing down doors in the projects, and then there's some horrible situation behind there, and they rescue the poor little black kid whose parents are, terrible or
Junkies
yeah,
or whatever.
But it's not that. There are regular people living in there. Right? And trying to make their way.
Exactly.
And that I would love to see those people, right? As collateral damage, but also as survivors. And that's who I can emotionally connect to. And by the way, and I'll stop talking, I swear, but if Zach connects with any of those people, now he's got something else in the race.
That's the big thing, though, is that he's in that neighborhood. So he's not in the suburbs or whatever. He lives in the neighborhood that has suffered because of this. So I really wanted that to be a big component, because he's come home to the neighborhood he once knew that is not the neighborhood he once knew. And, that's the beautiful thing about Detroit that's really interesting, is the mix of whites and blacks and how they live together and how they have the same level of poverty and they have the same level of education and lifestyle that is kind of unique to me.
Right.
And I wanted that to be something that is centralizing for him, because this is his neighborhood that's being affected by all of this as well.
That's great.
That's just great.
God,
I love that. And it's so smart to put him have him come back to his old neighborhood and he's there. I like that better than mine. It's great.
Yeah. Hey, have you ever seen, there was a series on Showtime, it's a while back now, maybe 8-10 years, called Boss with Kelsey Grammer. You ever see it, Kat?
Oh, yeah.
I'm just thinking about it a little bit, because that was it was an amazing show, but it was all about corruption in Chicago. Kelsey Grammer's the boss, but he developed Lewy body, a disease that was causing him to hallucinate and so on, which doesn't exactly line up with your character, but it was interesting for the ways in which it was handled politics corruption, and even the way they handled his hallucinations when that point came. It was all very interesting.
It was, and I think the reason and the way it applies to you, and Kat, you got to go find this. It's hard to find, is the issue with it. But with Boss, I don't know why. But the thing that is so great about it is they took what was key was his connection to the corruption was he just wanted to stay mayor.
Right.
And so it was his pride and who he was, and it was so wrapped up in it, and that's why the corruption was interesting. So the corruption being connected to, Zach, and being connected to these cops in some way, and being connected. Some of the cops, by the way, probably live in the suburbs and they drive in to police the black people, and then they get out.
Yeah,
right?
I wanted that to be the police chief. That's what he does.
Sure.
Oh my God.
Sure.
I'm so into this. All right, let's get down to brass tacks. Jim, what's the structure? You got 10 episodes. I'm not asking you, Kat, because I keep putting you on jump in anytime, but I'm putting Jim on the spot. What's the structure? You got 10 episodes. What's the story?
I'm going to steal from Us, which is always, it's homage to Us. We wrote a script once. We had, it was about a doctor who came back from war. Right.
Right.
And it was the unexpected, the war doctor who's living with his PTSD. Right. And in our case, it was a story about a doctor who had helped the CIA. He had helped fix up people who were being tortured and interrogated by the CIA, totally betraying his Hippocratic oath and every reason he became a doctor to begin with. Well, what does that guy look like when he comes back home, and has to live with what he's been and what he's done? And what we did across our pilot episode was to play off the hallucinations he was having, the dreams he was having, the PTSD sort of flashes, how that story played out in real life, what it said about him and what was going on, why he was doing the things he's doing now. What story is it that's haunting him, that is driving him to act the way he's acting in the story we're now seeing? And it feels like I sort of crave something like that. Like, I mean, this is a guy who, if he's this lone wolf, special forces kind of guy, but he's allowed his cousin to bring him back and make him part of a task force, which isn't something he wants to do instinctively. Like, and he's come back to his old neighborhood and it's all messed up now. Like, what's driving him, and does that tie back to his past in a way that shines light in both directions?
All right, well, let me jump in then. You didn't answer my question in structure, but I was listening to you and you sparked the answer to the question. One thing. This goes back to what you were saying before. Maybe he comes back and he takes the job, and we don't find this out to the end of the first episode because he knows his cousin is corrupt.
I was wondering that too.
Oh,
I
sure
was saying
you
that.
were.
No, I was. I was thinking because, no, but that's
okay,
good.
Right,
that's good.
Right. So because now I'm like, oh, now he's got an agenda. Right. He's got an emotional one too, but now he knows what his cousin is doing,
and that's the part you can hide.
Right.
Is that actually was his agenda all along.
He knows it?
Yeah. He's known it all along. And so he starts it from the I don't know what this means, by the way. This is the crazy
How
talk.
would he have known it? Well, because here's what I had in mind is that the cousin and he have had a fractured relationship their whole lives, and Zach isn't particularly fond of this cousin, but he took this job because it was a job, and he needs to have money, and he needs to have a job, and B, it brought him back to be helping out his father. But he has never liked this cousin and doesn't particularly care for the cousin. And I love the notion that he knows that his cousin has done this. I'm just trying to figure out, like, how would he know it?
Well, I think that's plot, and I think there are lots of answers you can find for that. The question for me is
easy for you to
say. Why is
then go do it?
but why is he? It feels like he's hiding what he knows in a certain way, and is it because he knows it'll screw up his dad to find out the truth, or do you flip that relationship and he was actually always close to his cousin, but he quickly finds out or comes to understand that now his cousin has become something else while he was gone, but he doesn't want to hang his cousin out to dry. He's trying to solve the problem without actually blowing up his own family.
That I get the motivation to try to. It's not that he's there to take down the cousin. He's there to save the cousin, or at least save his family.
Take it down, right, and still save his family.
Right.
Because it's family versus neighborhood, right? He wants to save the neighborhood, but he doesn't want to destroy his family, and it feels like to do the one he has to do the other.
And he's juggling all those things at the same time.
Right.
And that's real tension. That's personal stakes to the nth degree.
And that's what I love. I love that notion. I love the notion of him, I didn't want it to be that I wanted him to have the dilemma of wanting to save his cousin, of wanting to get his cousin out of this mess. But I also didn't want the cousin to be hapless. Like, the cousin needs to be pretty aware of what he's doing and power hungry,
right.
and
totally
and just a jerk, like not a good dude at all. And here's Zach, who is decent and who knows how much, like, I love the notion that the father loves the cousin. And what does that look like in terms of what Zach has to do with the task force, and what he has to do to take down his cousin, and can he take down his cousin? Because I love blood thicker than water stories. So
right. I mean, there's a world where your season arc is you're building. He manages to build the case that he can then take to his cousin and say, "Look, I've got your head in a vice." Right? Like you step back, or I have to take you down because it's the only way I can accomplish all these other good things that are important to me. And the cousin says, "Screw you." Right. And we're going to fight this out. And he takes it to the next level, which gives you season 2, and it changes.
Right. Or it gives you episode 4, because you could pull,
however
you
want to
move this all to the left, move it all earlier.
Save nothing.
Yeah. I mean, the idea is, you ask, how did you could find out that he comes home, his cousin makes him an offer. He says no. He goes out that night to the bar. He has his drink, and then he comes in the next day and he says, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And you're like, how did he make that decision? You don't know. You come up with some reason why he did it that it seems reasonable.
Right.
And then you get to Act 5, and then, that's when you do your flashback and you find out what he did that night, which is he went and talked to old friends and this or that, or he had a suspicion and he did this, and that's when
the Latina bar owner told him things that put it together for him.
Whatever, not as long as it's not too gifty, and he was smart, right? And then now he knows, and so I'm like, oh my God, he knows what he's going to do. And then he knows he's screwed now. What's he going to do? And then he goes in the on the nose version. He goes to the birthday party with his father standing there, and he's looking at his cousin hugging his father, and he knows that he's in. And then what's he going to do? And that's our first episode. And I'm like, I got. Oh, and by the way, the other person that's there is someone in the government, and it's all connected with this, in this fictional world.
And the cake explodes.
And the cake explodes.
and your main character is going to have the guy he can talk to, so we know this stuff, right? There has to be his high school buddy who went onto the force and now he's part of the task force or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, and that was the other component too, is that I wanted him to have like neighborhood allies, you know, almost against his will, that he has allies in this neighborhood that, you know, he doesn't necessarily know that he has, but when they see him and they see the return of him, like they think of it as sort of the return of their ability to get their neighborhood back. And he's suddenly now saddled with the responsibility of this community and then his task force, and he's got all this shit on him that he's just like, oh man, I didn't need any of this, but that actually is what he needed and didn't know it, you know. So I did want him to have like someone neighborhood who is his person.
No, I think that's great. And you know, when you're sitting here talking about this with the showrunner that's asked you in because they love this script and they want to hire you, and he or she says, so what happens down the road after this pilot? And you know, now you've got family stuff. And so everything is fraught. Right. Everything he does is going to be, you solve the case, hurt the family. Protect the family, hurt the case. Right? You've got the neighborhood guy who's in the middle of it and could get killed at any minute because he's living in a war zone. Or if not a war zone, then certainly a difficult place to live. And by the way, maybe he'll be tossed out by the corrupt, you know, housing, urban development, whatever the department's called. Right. You know, it's, oh, God, it's
good.
It's good, man.
It's good drama.
Yeah. Why are you talking to us? You don't need to talk to us.
You should be writing. What are you doing?
Yeah. I would just say.
Well, I started trying to break it down and was like, oh man, I'm finding myself in like spirals. And so I thought when you said you were doing this, Sam, I was like, hell yeah, sign me up because I need help.
Well, I think you might have to come back because we have to end soon, but we have to break this. That's the thing that we need to do is break it act by act by act and get just a tight pilot on it. I mean, that would be really interesting.
You've got all the pieces here, though. It feels like to me like there's some, you know, it needs to be explored more in different ways, but it feels good. It's interesting.
Kat, I would recommend nailing down 5, 6, 7 characters, right?
Okay.
Just really don't say a little bit of this or a little bit. Just say exactly this.
It's going to give you the web of people, like between the community and the family. If that's the tension, if he's ultimately sort of choosing between family and neighborhood, if that's his core dilemma, that's great. And you need to concrete versions of what he's choosing between.
And you know, the great thing is that he's a fish out of water in a weird way. He's not. He used to live here. But everything's new. Everybody's new to him, or a lot of people.
The fish is the same. The water has changed.
Yeah, that's right. And
exactly.
And I don't know if that metaphor holds up.
The fish isn't really the same, is it?
No, I like it.
But,
same fish, different tank.
Other people can have good metaphors. You don't have to own all the good metaphors.
Yeah, Sam, that's right. I can have my own metaphors. Damn it.
I'm just as hard on my metaphors as his metaphors. But I think we need those characters so we can start building a story. Like we can come up with the plot shape of, and then he finds out his cousin's involved. Let's do it at the end of the pilot because that'll be like, bam, that's what the show's about, instead of saving the big surprise for the episode that won't get made. So let's do this, right? But that's just
it's still a little generic.
It's not funky enough yet. It's that's why I sparked to, for example, not necessarily, but having the bartender be older, because I haven't seen that. So and the only thing that makes things that I haven't seen are not plot moves, because
it's character moves.
It's character moves, because even though it's like, she's leaving her husband, because we've never seen that, but I've never seen these two leave each other, and that is always, and I fall for it every time.
Right.
Every time when I'm watching television. I do.
Everybody does. That's why there's 40,000 shows on the air right now.
Yeah, and if we sat around with TV writers, who've been doing it for a while, we can ping pong those plot moves so fast. And some guys are really good at it, and they can do it. And then always the question is, okay, how do we make it matter?
Right.
And
that comes from character.
And that's the character stuff, which I think obviously you know. So Kat, I think we have to do this again, and we have to break this story.
Yeah,
it's under my skin.
Think so, because I need the help to do it. And you guys have sparked a lot of things in me that make so much more sense. Like I knew the central story was there, and I felt like my story engine was right. but there's just a lot of the surrounding structure and things that I would love some help with.
Well, you also have too much, just to make this easier for you.
Right.
You have way too much, right? Yeah, because
of course I do.
You got 50 pages, 50, 60, and we can't have 14 characters, and and it's HUD and the gangsters and the cops and his private life. I mean, you start breaking that down, it's just a few pages for each one. So
I know.
So this is going to really be about chiseling away the extraneous marble so we can get to it. It's just got to be that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I do think a lot of things are intertwined, and so I wonder if there is not a way to keep some of the corruption stuff sort of multi-layered, but not have it be overwhelming or too overplotted. But I definitely I think that's the kind of interesting thing about corruption is the levels of corruption and the ways that you don't even understand how deep it goes.
Right.
In your pilot for a show like this, you want to see the tips of 10 icebergs.
Yes.
Right? Just the tips, though.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Just the tip.
And
that's a different podcast.
And just, by the way, moving on, just questions. It's just questions is what another way to put that.
Clearly, this show is streaming, not for network.
This could go anywhere, really.
If you invite me on, I'm the salty bartender. So
yeah, right. There we go.
All right.
There we go.
All right. JR, who's our producer, is saying we got to stop.
We have to go.
We could do this all day. But this is great, Kat. Thank you for taking time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was super helpful. So I'll look to hear from JR to schedule my part 2, right?
All right.
We'll
check in.
Thanks, Kat.
Okay. See you, Kat.
All right.
Bye, Kat.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. And that's all we've got for you this week. Our producer, J.R. Zamora-Thal, is working the mixing board.
Our logo was designed by Julien de Bar-Montclair, and our music was provided by Bouderays out of Austin, Texas.
If you want to get in touch, we are at The Salmon Gym on Instagram and Twitter, and you can find us on Facebook and YouTube as The Writer's Room with Sam and Jim.
And if you like hanging out in the room with us, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And tell a friend, would you, so we can get JR paid. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.